everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ashley and today I'm going to be telling you about the 10 best and worst books that I've read so far this year. I've read about 80 books at this point in the year. We're a little over halfway through the year, and I thought instead of doing the mid-year freakout tag, I would do just a compilation of my top 5 best and my top 5 worst books that I've read so far in the year. I just didn't really feel like doing the mid-year freakout tag this year, so this is a substitute for that. We're gonna go from the absolute worst book I have read so far this year all the way to the best book that I have read so far this year. Also, before we get started, I should say these are my own personal opinions. This is just based on books that I enjoyed or didn't enjoy for particular reasons. All of these books have an audience for them. Some of my favorites you might not like, some of my least favorites you might love, and that's okay. We all have subjective opinions about books. With that being said, let's go ahead and jump on in, starting with my worst book of the year so far. So the worst book that I've read so far this year, in my opinion, is One Italian Summer by Rebecca Serle. I was so excited for this book. It sounded like exactly what I would love. I do primarily read thrillers, mystery, and horror books, but I also like to read books that have some sort of magical element in them, literary fiction, romance, and this sounded like a nice emotional blending of those things. What this story is supposed to be about is this woman was planning a trip to Italy with her mother for the summer. Her mother ends up getting really sick and dies before they can take the trip, and she decides to still go after her mother's passing, but go to Italy by herself and kind of see the way her mother lived growing up, because her mother was from Italy. And when she gets there, she ends up running into her mother from the past. So there's the magical element in it, and they get that summer to spend together. She's learning about a different side of her mother she never saw before, and it's very emotional because now she doesn't have her mother in her life anymore. Sounded really good, ended up being really bad for me. I absolutely loved the vibes. I thought the vibes were great. The Italy vibes, the food, just the ambience of the book was great. I've been to Italy once before and it just felt like Italy. The book did bring Italy to life well, but I hated the main character and the choices that she made. Long story short, she treats her husband terribly, which I understand she's grieving and going through a lot, but she is just telling him, like, I just don't think I want to be married to you anymore. I don't know who I am without my mother in my life, and I don't know what our relationship is if I don't know who I am, and I don't think we can be together anymore, which is fine and a valid way to feel while you're grieving. But then she proceeds to just like go to Italy and like cheat on him the whole summer and not really see consequences to that, and that was not for me. I do not like reading infidelity plots, so really didn't like her choices. Get that she was grieving, but couldn't get behind her and her decisions. Really wish this book could have been the magical thing that I wanted it to be. Next up, this one is going to probably be a little bit of a surprise, maybe not if you watch my videos really closely and you remember how I rate a lot of books, but this is a book that is very highly loved in the horror community, but I gave it a whopping 1 star and did not like it at all, and that is Near the Bone by Christina Henry. This is a story about this woman who is living isolated on this mountain with her husband. Her husband is very abusive towards her, and then there are these people who kind of start hanging out around the mountain area. He wants to keep her super isolated from everything, doesn't want her to contact any of them, but then there's also this like creature potentially roaming the woods as well, so it becomes a survival story, and there is this supernatural type monster creature, but also the real life monster in her abusive husband, and that's the story. I really just did not like this story. I really have trouble reading about abusive men in books, and it's hard for me to really articulate why without potentially coming across the wrong way, but the only way I can describe it is reading this guy's character felt so caricature-like of abuse, and I know that can be very realistic for certain people and abuse that they incur. I know people are like that, people are monsters in that way, but it reads like a caricature to me most of the time when characters are developed like that. I have seen very bad men in my life. I've witnessed it. It just doesn't feel the same to me. I don't know how to describe it without potentially, you know, coming off wrong. So I don't want to invalidate anybody's experiences. That's what I'm trying to do. But I can't connect to that style of writing. And then it really just irritates me on a very personal level. Like, it triggers me very deeply. And so that sets me up to not like this book anyway. But yeah, I just didn't like that. Didn't really like the pacing of the book. Didn't like the direction it went. Was very surprised surprised at the structure and pacing of it, and ultimately just wasn't for me. Next up, one that is probably not a huge surprise that I did not enjoy is 9 Lives by Peter Swanson. Many people did not enjoy this one this year, so this probably isn't too shocking. This is a thriller where there are these 9 different characters, and one day they all receive a list with all of their names on the list, and then they start dying one by one. You don't know who's killing them, and you don't know why. That's the whole story. It has a really interesting synopsis and setup, but for many reasons, it just didn't really work for me. I thought there were way too many characters. You couldn't really follow them. You didn't care about them as they were dying. Yes, I've liked that in books before, but the way it was done in this one, I just didn't really like it. And maybe you could have got me. Maybe I could have given it like a 2 or a 3 star if the ending had been somewhat satisfying, somewhat interesting, but it was the most absurd ending to a thriller you could have possibly read. The motive behind the character who is the killer absolutely made no sense. If you explain this book to someone and you tell them what happened, even they'll be like, I'm sorry, what? Can you repeat for me what you just said happened at the end? Because it just makes absolutely no sense. And yeah, it was a very unsatisfying thriller. Next up, we have Primal Animals by Julia Lynn Rubin. This is a YA horror story that is about this teen girl who's going to this summer camp. It's supposed to be a great camp to help you improve test scores and get into a better college. She's going there because her mom went there growing up, and her mom's excited to finally have her at the age where she can go and experience the camp that she experienced. But when she gets there, the vibes are sketch. Things aren't good. Dark things are going on. Super interesting concept. I've read books like this before and really enjoyed them. I really enjoy YA horror, so I'm always down for a YA horror book. I love books that have covers like this, so I really thought I was going to like this, but it was just a no for me. For pretty much every reason. I didn't like the characters, the plot, the direction the story takes, I thought was very weird. What ultimately ends up happening was also just really strange, and it just didn't work for me. This one's also one where there's quite a few characters, and it took me a long time to figure out who was who, and there is a queer romance element in this, and it took me a while to figure out who was going to be the romantic interest. Once that started, I didn't feel super attached to that either, because I just felt like there was so much else going on, and ultimately just wasn't a very good time. And then last, for my worst books of the year so far, we have Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. I did an entire reading vlog dedicated to my experience of this book, so you can check that out to hear my full thoughts. And if you're feeling spicy like many other people are who watch that video, roast me in the comments. Why not? It's already just really terrible over there, so just keep going. But yeah, this is the least of my worst books, because the reason that I didn't like this book isn't because of what the book is. It's more about what I thought the book was going to be, and then that being something that I don't like to read. So I would have definitely just DNF'd this book if I hadn't decided to do a dedicated reading vlog to this one, but it was too late. I was already in it, already had it on the filming schedule. We just had to keep going, so I pushed through. And yeah, I didn't enjoy this one. It's definitely a very, very slow-paced historical fiction with some, let's say, creative license on the realistic journey that someone might take. There's also a lot of controversy around the author on this one, so it's not a book that I would particularly care to back really strongly anyway if I did end up liking it. The way it plays out in the end is really interesting, especially when you compare that to the real life accusations against the author, and that just makes me uncomfy, and I didn't like it anyway. So this is probably the last time I'm going to talk about this book, because I think that's just better for everyone if I don't. So that was that. Let's forget I ever read it. Next, we're going to talk about my 5 best books of the year that I've read so far, and these are going to go in the order of least best to very best, which is very hard to do. It's very hard to order books that you love, especially when you read multiple different types of books or genres. So I love these all in different ways. They all did something different for me. This is my best attempt at being able to stack rank them. First up, we have The Burning Girls by CJ Tudor. This was the very first book that I read of 2022, and it was a whopping 5-star read, so it was a great book to start the year off with. Why this one ended up being on the bottom of the stack is more just about distance of time since I've read it. I don't remember this book as well as I read some of the other books that I've read in recent months, so it's kind of fallen down the list a little bit. I also, after reading this book, this was my first book I ever read by CJ Tudor, and after I loved it so much, I decided to read all the other novels that CJ Tudor has read, and I ended up doing a video where I talked about all the CJ Tudor books. I stack ranked which ones are my favorite to least favorite, what I like about each of them, which ones I recommend starting with, or if you like certain elements, which ones you might want to pick up. And I think after doing that too, some of the CJ Tudor books blend together in my mind a little bit. And I also, since I enjoyed some of them less, started wondering, do I love this book so much, or was it just like the first experience I had of that? So I don't know, I've like twisted my mind around a little bit with this, but this is a thriller story that has some interesting religious horror elements in it as well, which is what I really liked about it. I thought the vibes were really, really great. In this story, you're following a vicar who is moving to this small town with their teenage daughter to go be the vicar of this local parish. And the town has a lot of dark history to it. The last vicar of this church hung himself in the church. Girls went missing a long time ago. There are these burning girl figures that get left around, and it's just a really interesting kind of place to dissect. I feel like this book definitely gives like Stephen King vibes. If you like those types of stories where it's a small town, there's like questionable supernatural / religious sort of things going on. And I really enjoyed it, especially when I read it at the time. I was just really happy that this was my first book of the year. So this is definitely a thriller that I do recommend. And it's also a thriller that I feel like I'm gonna have to read again because I already feel like it's time to just get a refresher on this. Next up, we have Sundial by Catriona Ward. This is the second book that I've read from Catriona Ward. And this one I enjoyed even more than the first that I read, which was The Last House on Needless Street. This one I really, really enjoyed. In this story, you're following a woman and her daughter, and they're going back to the town that the woman grew up in, which is called Sundial. She's taking her daughter there because she started noticing some questionable and dangerous behavior in her daughter, and she also has another daughter who's younger, and she's worried that the older daughter is going to put the younger daughter in danger. So she's like, I gotta get this girl away from my other daughter before she does something that hurts her. We gotta figure out what's going on. I'm taking her back to Sundial, and we're gonna figure things out. Once they're there, you start to wonder what that means. What is she planning to do with her daughter? And also, what is her daughter thinking? Because you also end up getting her perspective in the story, and it's just this very tense environment while you're wondering who's gonna make it out of there alive. Meanwhile, you're also getting flashbacks to the mother's past, her time growing up in Sundial. Quite a bit of the book takes part in the past. So if you don't like flashbacks, if you want to stay in the present moment, this one is quite a bit of flashbacks, but I really liked it. I really enjoyed learning about the mother's history, the way she grew up, the things that happened to her, and the twist in this one I thought was really, really interesting. It was unlike anything I've really ever read before. And also, can we talk about how stunning this cover is? I mean, I'm not giving it points for the cover, but it's a really good cover. Next up, we have a horror novella, and that is Crossroads by Laurel Hightower. I really love a good horror novella. I love reading horror in the short form, and I also really love reading horror about grief. I just feel like it's a really effective form of horror, and this did all of those things. It is super short, and it portrays grief in a really effective way. In this story, you're following this woman whose son has passed away. She frequently goes to visit the site of where he passed. He got in a car accident, and she goes there a lot. And one day while she's there, a drop of blood from her hand falls on the gravesite, and then she starts thinking that she's seeing her son's ghost. So she starts getting into this mindset of, if I make these sacrifices, will I be able to see my son? This one's really heavy. It's really, really sad, but it is just written so well. It was so interesting. It was the perfect pace and the perfect little length, and I absolutely loved it, and I cannot wait to read more from Laurel Hightower. Next up, we have my favorite thriller of the year so far, and that is The Island by Adrienne McKenty. This is an island survival story about this family who goes to this island off the coast of Australia while they're on vacation. Once they're there, something very bad happens, and they get stuck and held hostage there, and the whole story is about them trying to escape. What I've learned since reading and loving this book and hearing other people read this book and sometimes love it, sometimes not, and sometimes be in the middle, is I feel like survival thrillers are very divisive. You either love them or you can't really get into them. I am finding that I really love a survival thriller, especially when I feel like I can really connect to the characters and really worry about them and feel like the stakes are really high because I want them to make it out alive. Why they don't go well for some people, I think, is because the story gets set up immediately. Like right in the beginning, here's the setup, here's the inciting incident, and then the rest is all more about action, like, ooh, how are they gonna get out? So I see how that can start to feel like repetitive for some people or not as surprising because you're not always getting the biggest plot twist in that. It's more about how are they going to survive this situation, and it feels like that high, intense, high stakes feeling, which that really works for me. So I really enjoyed this one, and I also do feel like there were some interesting twists and turns in the story as well. So it didn't feel super repetitive for me. It felt like the stakes kept rising and getting worse, and I kept wondering how in the world are they going to get out of this situation. And I also really loved the dynamics of the characters because the situation that they're in, it's a husband and a new wife and his two kids, and so she's trying to win over the kids and get accepted by the kids, and watching that play out while in this terrible situation. I also really liked that emotional element to the story, and I just freaking love this book. So I really highly recommend it, but if you don't like survival thrillers, then I mean, probably don't even pick it up if you already know you don't like that, because that is exactly what this is. But if you do like that, or if you're unsure, this is definitely one that I recommend. And then my number one favorite book of the year so far, which was very hard to pick and prioritize, especially over The Island, is Confessions by Kanae Minato. This is a psychological revenge story that has dark elements, and so I feel like it most often gets categorized either horror or thriller, but I just call it more like psychological revenge suspense type story. This is also a translated story. It was originally written in Japanese, and what you're following in the story is this school teacher who is talking to the kids that she's teaching. Her daughter has recently died, and she is saying to them, I know which ones out of you are responsible for my daughter's death. And the whole story is about her very carefully plotted revenge on the students who were responsible for killing her daughter. It is so dark, it is so gripping, it is so twisty, it is jaw-dropping, it is written amazingly. It is also slow burn, so if you don't like slow burn stories, maybe this one won't be for you, but I absolutely love this. It's told in 6 chapters. Most chapters are from a different character's perspective, and I thought it was just so clever how all the different puzzle pieces come together. It goes off on these tangents sometimes, and you're like, why are we reading about this? Why are we hearing about this? And then the tiniest details all end up being so important, and they all come together, and it just creates this like aha moment. I just thought this book was brilliant. I really, really loved it. I was super impressed by it, especially because I've heard people talking about this book for years, and I just never really thought to pick it up. I thought it was probably going to be overhyped and I wouldn't love it as much, but I was absolutely blown away. So if you've been hearing about this one and considering picking it up or not, I would definitely recommend making it the time to do it now, because it was so worth it. So that was it for my top 5 and bottom 5 reads of the year so far. I'm sure we will have many more mixed in as the rest of the year goes on, and I usually do like a top 10 and a worst 10 at the end of the year, so you can probably expect to see that too at the end of the year. But yeah, it's been an interesting reading year. I've gotten a lot of reading done so far this year. I've had some big duds and I've had some big wins. I can't really tell if this year is going better for me or worse than my reading year last year. It doesn't feel like a particularly good reading year, but it does feel like a little bit better than last year to me for some reason. So I think I'm getting more and more attuned to my reading taste, which books I'm putting on my TBR, which books I'm not picking up, even if other people are liking them, because I know they just won't be for me. So I'm excited to see how the rest of the year shapes out for my reading. I'm excited to see what's going to be my top 10 at the end of the year. Hopefully I don't have too many more to add to the bottom 10, because that's not fun for anyone. But yeah, that was it for me. Let me know down in the comments below if you have read any of these books and what you think, and then let me know what is your best book of the year so far and your worst book of the year so far. Also, if you want to leave an emoji in the comments to let me know that you got to the end of the video, for today's emoji we can do, I think there's a milk emoji, which is a reference to my favorite book of the year so far. If you know, you know. So do milk, and if you don't have a milk emoji, or if there's one that doesn't exist, let's do a cow, because I know a cow exists and cows make milk. So there we go. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on my next video. Bye.